While Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, something else reached its peak in America, something that would vanish in just 5 years. The summer of 1969 was a turning point in American history. While Neil Armstrong walked on the moon and 500,000 people danced at Woodstock, something else was reaching its peak in driveways and drag strips across America. That year, American automakers unleashed the most powerful automobiles ever built for ordinary citizens. Within just a few years, everything would change. But for 1 year, the dream burned at its brightest. The showroom floors of American dealerships in spring 1969 gleamed with freshly waxed metal in colors called Hugger Orange, Daytona Yellow, and Rally Green. The smell of new vinyl and fresh chrome filled the air. Behind the glass, salesmen in skinny ties were ready to talk about horsepower numbers that sound almost impossible today. This wasn't just a good year for cars. This was the peak of something that would never happen again. America was building 9.58 million new cars that year. General Motors controlled more than half the market, with Ford and Chrysler fighting for the rest. The big three automakers held over 90% of all car sales in the United States. Foreign competition barely registered, though the Volkswagen Beetle was starting to catch on with the counterculture crowd. The economics made perfect sense for performance. The average American family earned about $9,400 per year. A new muscle car could be had for around $3,000 to $4,000, which meant you could finance your dream machine for about $96 a month. Gas cost just 35 cents a gallon, so you could cruise all night on a $5 bill. Insurance was still affordable for most young buyers. It was the perfect moment to buy an American performance car. But what made 1969 truly special was not just the timing. It was the cars themselves. That year saw the release of machines that would become legends: the COPO Camaro ZL1, the Boss 429 Mustang, the Dodge Charger Daytona, the Plymouth Road Runner, and the Pontiac GTO Judge. Each one represented the best that American engineering could offer, created by teams of brilliant engineers who knew their time was running out. The 1960s had been one long escalation of power. In 1964, Pontiac had started the whole craze by dropping a 389 cubic inch V8 into a mid-size car and calling it the GTO. It made 325 horsepower, which was shocking for its time. But by 1969, that number seemed almost quaint. The major automakers were locked in a battle. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler threw everything they had into the fight, each trying to one-up the others with bigger engines, more horsepower, and faster quarter-mile times. Engine sizes climbed from 389 cubic inches to 396, then to 426, 427, 440, and finally the massive 454 and 455 cubic inch monsters. Chrysler emerged as the horsepower king with its legendary 426 Street Hemi, rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. This engine was so powerful that many experts believed it actually produced closer to 500 horsepower. Chrysler just did not want to admit it, and that brings us to one of the strangest parts of this whole era. Manufacturers regularly lied about how powerful their cars were, but unlike today's automakers, who might exaggerate, the 1960s car companies actually understated their numbers. A car advertised at 375 horsepower might actually make 425 or more. Why would they do this? 3 reasons. First, insurance companies were starting to charge more for high-powered cars, so lower official numbers meant cheaper premiums. Second, drag racing classes were determined by weight and horsepower, so lower ratings meant you could race in easier classes. Third, General Motors had a corporate policy that theoretically limited its divisions to 1 horsepower per 10 pounds of vehicle weight. Engineers found creative ways around this rule. The result was a buyer's paradise. You could walk into a dealership, order a car that officially made 375 horsepower, and drive home in a machine that actually produced well over 400 horsepower. The manufacturers winked, the buyers grinned, and the quarter-mile strips lit up with rubber and smoke. Perhaps no car better shows the rebellious spirit of 1969 than the COPO Camaro ZL1. This car should not have existed at all. General Motors' corporate headquarters had banned its divisions from putting engines larger than 400 cubic inches in anything smaller than a full-size car. Only the Corvette got an exception. But a Chevrolet engineer named Vince Piggins found a loophole. The company had something called the Central Office Production Order System, originally designed for fleet vehicles like taxis, police cars, and work trucks. Piggins realized that if the right codes were entered, the factory would build almost anything with no questions asked. Working with dealers like Don Yenko of Pennsylvania and Fred Gibb of Illinois, Piggins used the COPO system to slip 4 27 cubic inch engines into Camaros right on the assembly line. These were not just any 427s. The ZL1 version used an all-aluminum block and heads, making it lighter than the standard iron version, while producing somewhere around 500 to 550 horsepower. Officially, Chevrolet rated it at 430 horsepower. Nobody believed that number for a second. The ZL1 was a monster. It could hit 60 miles per hour or 97 kilometers per hour in about 4 seconds and tear through the quarter mile in around 11.6 seconds. These numbers are impressive today. In 1969, they were almost unbelievable. But there was a catch. The ZL1 option alone added $4,160 to the base price, more than doubling the cost of a standard Camaro. When all was said and done, a ZL1 Camaro cost about $7,200. That was more than a base Corvette and nearly 3/4 of an average family's yearly income. Fred Gibb had ordered 50 ZL1s, confident he could sell them to drag racers. He was wrong. The cars sat on his lot like expensive paperweights. Many dealers eventually pulled the ZL1 engines out and sold them separately, replacing them with cheaper iron block 427s just to move the cars. Gibb himself did not sell his last new 1969 ZL1 until 1972, and even that one came back as a repossession. Only 69 ZL1 Camaros were ever built. Today, these same cars that dealers could not give away sell for over $1 million at auction. The ugly duckling became the most valuable Camaro ever made. While Chevrolet was sneaking around corporate rules, Ford was waging a different kind of war. The company wanted to dominate NASCAR, but to do that, they needed to put their new 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi engine on the street. NASCAR rules required manufacturers to sell at least 500 cars with an engine before it could be used in competition. Ford chose the Mustang as the host vehicle, not because it was the best fit, but because they wanted the Mustang name associated with racing glory. There was just one problem. The massive 429 engine would not fit in a Mustang engine bay. The solution was CarCraft, a specialty shop in Brighton, Michigan, that had built Ford's famous GT40 race cars. These craftsmen hand-modified every single Boss 429, moving the shock towers, relocating the battery to the trunk, and completely reworking the front suspension. Each car received its own KK serial number, starting with KK number 1201 and ending with KK number 2558. The Boss 429 was officially rated at 375 horsepower, but period tests suggested the true number was closer to 500 horsepower. The engine featured aluminum cylinder heads with special crescent combustion chambers. Not quite a full hemispherical design, like Chrysler's Hemi, but close enough to earn it the nickname Semi-Hemi. At $4,798, the Boss 429 cost nearly double a base Mustang. Ford built 859 of them in 1969 and another 499 in 1970. That is just 1,358 cars total. A tiny production run that makes them extremely valuable today, with prices typically ranging from $400,000 to $500,000 at auction. Here is the ironic twist. Despite all this effort, the Boss 429 Mustang never actually raced in NASCAR. By the time the street cars were ready, Ford had largely withdrawn factory support, and racing teams preferred other platforms. The Boss 429 became a paper race car, homologated for competition, but never deployed as intended. If any single car symbolizes the wild ambition of 1969, it is the Dodge Charger Daytona. When Chrysler's standard 1968 Charger 500 failed to dominate NASCAR's superspeedways, and when their star driver Richard Petty defected to Ford, the company pulled out all the stops. They literally hired missile engineers to design something no one had ever seen before. The result looked like it had arrived from another planet. The Daytona featured an 18-inch pointed nose cone extending from the front and a 23-inch tall rear wing, nearly 2 feet of aluminum stabilizer rising above the trunk. The shape achieved a drag coefficient of 0.28, which was better than most 1990s supercars, including the Ferrari F40 and Lamborghini Murcielago. The engineering worked beyond anyone's dreams. During testing at Talladega Superspeedway in August 1969, Bobby Allison ran 4 laps over 200 miles per hour, though this was not officially recorded because Allison was among drivers boycotting the race over tire safety concerns. The official record came on March 24, 1970, when Buddy Baker strapped into a Daytona for a certified speed run. Dodge picked me to run the first official 200 mph lap at Talladega. We had all run 200 mph before, but not officially. By day's end, Baker had recorded 200.447 miles per hour, or 322 kilometers per hour. The first official 200-mile-per-hour lap on any closed course in any type of car. Chrysler built just 503 Dodge Charger Daytonas, the bare minimum needed for NASCAR homologation. Only 70 had the mighty 426 Hemi engine, and just 22 of those came with a 4-speed manual transmission. Like the ZL1 Camaro, many Daytonas sat unsold on dealer lots. That $3,860 sticker price was reasonable, but the wild styling was too much for most buyers. Some dealers actually removed the nose cones and wings and sold the cars as standard Chargers just to get them off the lot. Today, those decisions seem insane. In August 2024, a Hemi-powered Daytona with a 4-speed sold at Mecum, Monterey for $3.36 million. The same car had sold for $1.3 million just 2 years earlier. The ugly duckling strikes again. Not every legendary 1969 car was an exotic limited edition racer. The Plymouth Road Runner proved that raw American muscle could be affordable too. Named after the Warner Brothers cartoon character, complete with a licensed meep meep horn, the Road Runner stripped away luxury features to focus on what really mattered. Speed. The formula was simple. Take a standard Plymouth, remove the fancy seats and sound deadening, add the biggest engine you could afford, and head straight to the drag strip. The base Road Runner came with a 383 cubic inch V8, making 335 horsepower, enough to run the quarter mile in the high 14-second range. But for just $813 more, buyers could upgrade to the 426 Hemi and its earth-shaking 425 horsepower. In the middle of 1969, Plymouth introduced something even more exciting, the A12 6-pack option. This setup used a 440 cubic inch engine with 3 two-barrel carburetors, 6 barrels total, producing 390 horsepower. These cars came with a lift-off fiberglass hood held in place by hood pins, no wheel covers, just black steel wheels with chrome lug nuts, and an attitude that screamed, "Race me." The Road Runner was such a success that Motor Trend named it Car of the Year for 1969. Plymouth built 84,420 of them that year, by far the highest production number of the models run. Only 1,412 were the sought-after A12 six-pack models, and just 10 were Hemi-powered convertibles. Experts believe only 6 of those Hemi convertibles still exist today. At a base price of $2,945, the Road Runner put serious muscle within reach of ordinary working Americans. You did not need to be rich to feel the rumble of a big block V8 under your right foot. That democratic spirit made the Road Runner one of the most beloved muscle cars of all time. Pontiac had started the whole muscle car craze back in 1964 with the original GTO. By 1969, the brand was determined to stay relevant with something even more outrageous, the GTO Judge. Named after the "Here Comes the Judge" catchphrase from the TV show Rowan and Martin's Laugh In, the Judge was designed to be impossible to miss. The first 2,000 units came exclusively in Carousel Red, a bright orange that made sure no one ever missed it coming down the boulevard. Standard equipment included the Ram Air 3 400 cubic inch V8, producing 366 horsepower. But the real monsters were the Ram Air 4 cars. Officially rated at 370 horsepower, the Ram Air 4 actually produced closer to 425 horsepower, enough to blast through the quarter mile in 13.7 seconds at 103.6 miles per hour, or 167 kilometers per hour. The Judge package cost just $332 over a standard GTO, one of the EEDE best deals in muscle car history. Pontiac built 6,833 Judges in 1969, including 108 convertibles and a handful of extremely rare Ram Air 4 convertibles. Only 5 Ram Air 4 Judge convertibles were ever made, making them among the most valuable muscle cars in existence, worth upward of $700,000 today. Some of the most interesting 1969 muscle cars did not come directly from factories. A handful of special dealerships across the country took factory cars and made them even more insane. Don Yenko of Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, became the most famous of these super dealers. Before the COPO program, Yenko had been doing engine swaps the hard way, ordering SS 396 Camaros, pulling their engines, and installing 427s from Corvette parts. This was expensive, time-consuming, and voided most of the factory warranty. The COPO breakthrough changed everything. Yenko's 1969 cars came with factory-installed 427s, full 5-year, 50,000-mile warranties, and could be produced in much greater numbers. He built 201 Yenko Camaros in 1969, plus additional Chevelles and Novas. One such car belongs to legend. In 1974, a high school senior named Jeff Etchison bought a 1969 Yenko Camaro for $3,900, right after the oil crisis had made muscle cars worthless. People would trailer their cars to Elwood, Indiana, from all over the country, and search out Jeff's Camaro to compete in battles. As far as is known, Etchison's Camaro never lost a single race. After multiple run-ins with authorities and facing license suspension, Jeff parked the Camaro on jack stands in 1979 and preserved it for the next 38 years, until his death in 2017. His undefeated Yenko, one of only 7 Fathom Green automatics ever built, passed to a family friend for restoration. On Long Island, New York, Joel Rosen's Baldwin Motion created something even more extreme. These custom-built Chevrolets came with a guarantee: 11.50 seconds at 120 miles per hour, or 193 kilometers per hour in the quarter mile, or your money back. Not a single customer ever collected on that guarantee. In Chicago, Mr. Norm's Grand Spalding Dodge became the Midwest's Mopar Mecca. Norman Krause developed prototype cars that Chrysler later turned into factory models, including the first 383 Dart and the first 440 Dart. His dealership was a destination for anyone who wanted the fastest Mopar possible. To understand why these cars matter so much, you have to understand what America was like in 1969. This was a year of stunning contradictions. In July, 600 million people watched Neil Armstrong take his first steps on the moon, perhaps humanity's greatest achievement. A month later, 500,000 young people gathered at Woodstock to celebrate peace, love, and music while the Vietnam War raged halfway around the world. The country was split between hope and despair, between tradition and revolution. The Stonewall riots in June launched the modern gay rights movement. The Manson murders in August shocked the nation. Nixon had just taken office. The draft lottery sent young men to war. For many Americans, especially young men, cars represented something essential: freedom. The muscle car wasn't just transportation. It was a statement. It was rebellion against conformity, a middle finger to the boring sedans their parents drove. The roar of a big block V8 was the sound of independence itself. About 80% of American households owned at least one car in 1969. Almost 90% of domestic cars came with V8 engines. Two-door hardtops were the most popular, body style accounting for nearly 45% of all sales. Americans loved their cars big, powerful, and loud. The counterculture movement and the muscle car era existed in strange parallel. Both rejected the conformity of the 1950s. Both celebrated youth and speed and living for the moment. The hippies had Woodstock. The gearheads had the drag strip. Sometimes they were the same people. If you are enjoying this story of American automotive history and want to see more documentaries like this, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories about the cars that shaped our culture and changed the world. But even in 1969, those who paid attention could see trouble coming. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, published in 1965, had launched a consumer safety movement that was changing the auto industry. Insurance companies were starting to notice that muscle cars were involved in more accidents, and more expensive accidents, than ordinary sedans. By 1970, a State Farm study found that muscle cars had 56% higher insurance losses than regular vehicles. Collision claims were 50% higher. Comprehensive claims were 117% higher. Insurance companies responded the only way they knew how, by jacking up premiums. A young man who might have paid $300 a year to insure a regular car could find himself facing $1,000 to $1,500 for a muscle car. That is not just inconvenient. That is often more than the monthly car payment itself. Suddenly, the dream machine became unaffordable for exactly the young buyers it was designed to attract. At the same time, the federal government was preparing its own attack. The Clean Air Act of 1970, signed by President Nixon on December 31, 1970, mandated a 90% reduction in vehicle emissions by 1975. To meet these standards, manufacturers would have to lower compression ratios, add emissions equipment, and fundamentally change how their engines worked. The high-compression engines that made 1969 so exciting, with compression ratios of 11:1 or higher, required high-octane leaded gasoline to run properly. The new regulations would phase out leaded gas entirely, forcing manufacturers to drop compression ratios to 9:1 or lower. Power would plummet. And then came the final blow. In October 1973, the Arab oil embargo struck. Oil prices quadrupled almost overnight, rising from $3 per barrel to $12. Gas that had cost 35 cents a gallon jumped to over $1. Gas stations ran dry. Odd even rationing began. The president lowered the national speed limit to 55 miles per hour or 89 kilometers per hour. Suddenly, cars that got 7 to 13 miles per gallon looked less like freedom and more like financial. Suicide. By 1975, V8-powered car sales had dropped 55% compared to 1970. The Honda Civic, with its 40-mile-per-gallon rating, was outselling American Muscle 3-1. The decline was swift and brutal. In 1972, the industry switched from gross to net horsepower ratings, making the drop look even more dramatic. The Chrysler 426 Hemi, rated at 425 gross horsepower in 1971, was listed at just 350 net horsepower in 1972, even though the actual change was smaller than those numbers suggested. Real power losses came too. Compression ratios dropped. Emissions equipment choked the engines. Catalytic converters, required starting in 1975, demanded unleaded fuel and restricted exhaust flow. The Chevrolet Corvette 350, which made 370 horsepower in 1970, dropped to just 165 horsepower by 1975, the lowest point in Corvette history. The Pontiac GTO, which had started the whole craze, was discontinued after 1974. The Plymouth Barracuda and Dodge Challenger died the same year. The original Ford Mustang gave way to the embarrassing Mustang II, which initially did not even offer a V8 engine. New safety regulations added insult to injury. Bumper standards enacted in 1973 and 1974 required cars to withstand 5 mph or 8 km/h impacts without damage to safety components. The sleek chrome bumpers of the muscle car era were replaced by what engineers bitterly called chromed railroad ties, heavy, ugly additions that ruined the styling of nearly every American car. Automotive historians call the period from 1973 to 1983 the malaise era. Cars from this period were underpowered, overweight, and ugly. A 1979 AMC Spirit with a 304 cubic inch V8 made just 125 horsepower. A 1978 Ford with a massive 460 cubic inch engine, 7.5 liters of displacement, produced a pathetic 202 horsepower. These were not sports cars. They were bloated shadows of what American automakers had once built. Looking back more than 50 years later, it is clear that 1969 was a unique moment that can never be repeated. The confluence of factors that made it possible, cheap gas, affordable insurance, minimal regulations, fierce competition between manufacturers, and a cultural moment that celebrated speed and rebellion, will never align again. Consider what 1969 offered that no year before or since could match. The variety was unprecedented. That year you could buy a budget muscle car like the Road Runner, an exotic limited edition racer like the ZL1 Camaro, an aerodynamic NASCAR weapon like the Charger Daytona, or a balanced performer like the Oldsmobile 442 W30. Every price point, every philosophy, every type of speed was covered. The power was at its peak. Yes, 1970 saw General Motors finally lift its displacement ban, unleashing the 454 Chevelle SS and 455 GTOs. But by then, the writing was on the wall. Insurance premiums were skyrocketing. Emissions regulations loomed. The cars of 1970 were built with one eye looking backward at a closing door. The culture was perfectly aligned. America was reaching for the moon, while its young people were reaching for something harder to define: freedom, authenticity, a break from conformity. The muscle car embodied all of that. It was affordable rebellion on 4 wheels, and the timing was just right. 1969 came after engineers had perfected their craft. 5 years of the muscle car era had taught them how to extract maximum power from iron and aluminum and gasoline. But it came before the forces of regulation and economics made that craft impossible. Today, the cars of 1969 are worth more than anyone could have imagined. The same ZL1 Camaros that dealers could not sell for $7,200 now command over $1 million. Charger Daytonas that sat unwanted on dealer lots sell for $3 million or more Even relatively common cars like the GTO Judge and Plymouth Road Runner fetch 6 figures at auction. But it is not really about the money. It is about what these cars represent. They are time capsules of a moment when American industry could still amaze the world, when young people had affordable access to incredible performance, when the open road still felt truly open. The modern Dodge Challenger and Ford Mustang and Chevrolet Camaro are faster than their 1969 ancestors. They handle better, stop quicker, and are incomparably safer. But they are also heavier, more complex, and more expensive. A base 2024 Mustang GT costs around $45,000, more than 4 times the average American's monthly income. In 1969, a comparable car cost about 4 months' salary. More importantly, today's muscle cars exist in a world where high performance feels almost quaint. When a Tesla can hit 60 miles per hour, or 97 kilometers per hour in under 2 seconds, what does 400 horsepower even mean anymore? When autonomous vehicles loom on the horizon, what is the point of feeling a gas pedal under your foot? The muscle cars of 1969 were built in a world that still believed in the future of the automobile, a world where the car was the ultimate expression of American freedom and ingenuity. They were built by engineers who knew their golden age was ending, who poured everything they had into one last glorious moment before the regulations closed in. That is why we remember 1969. That is why those cars matter. They represent the end of something that will never come again, America's last great year for automobiles.